Former Vice President Mike Pence is the focus today of Christian Newsmakers. In a moment, we'll talk about his new book called What Conservatives Believe, Rediscovering the Conservative Conscience. We'll also get his thoughts about President Trump, the economy, and the ongoing conflict with Iran. Vice President Mike Pence, great to see you again. Thanks so much for being here on Channel
Thank
13.
you, Scott. Great to be with you.
We're going to talk about your book in a moment. I've read it, and I want to ask you a lot about that, but I want to start with your Christian faith. You do mention in this new book that you became a Christian in college. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did. You know, I was raised in a wonderful church family down in Columbus, Indiana. It was church on Sunday morning and grace before dinner, but by the time I got to high school, Scott, I really lost interest in religion broadly. And by the time I went down to Hanover College as a freshman, I had really left behind faith entirely. But it was there that I started to meet some young people to talk to me about having a personal relationship with God. And that was new to me. It was a fresh idea to me. I was intrigued by it. I began to attend a Christian fellowship group, and before the end of my freshman year at a Christian music festival in Wilmore, Kentucky, I made a decision to commit my life to Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And it changed my life forever. And in time, I had lessons to learn. You can read that in my other book. I
Right.
lessons along the way in politics where I've tried, however imperfectly, to live out my faith in the public square. But I've often said, when people have asked me where I'm coming from, I say I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. And I hope, much like you, that when people look at me, my family, my life, the first thing they see is my faith in the Lord.
Who was the one person that really helped you in your Christian faith as you were starting out as a Christian in college, and then, of course, leading into your political life?
Well, actually, I went to college with a recently retired senior pastor of Tabernacle Presbyterian Church. John Gable was a senior when I was a freshman. And he endured a lot of late nights at the fraternity. Me asking questions about religion. He would go on to a very distinguished career, not only here in Indianapolis, but across the Midwest, and continues to be a very dear and close friend. But John was one of those people that came into my life and not only helped lead me to the Lord, but also has been a great and mentoring and encouraging influence through all the years since.
Yeah. As a Christian, as you get older, how has your faith changed, deepened, and how are you now passing that on to your kids and grandkids?
Well, you and I are both in the grandparent business now.
Yes, that's right.
So congratulations to you.
Thank you, and you too.
There's a great sense of responsibility that I have. The Bible tells us to train up our children in the way they should go, and when they're old, they'll not depart from it. And we've tried in every way, Karen and I have, to make faith and devotion a regular part of our family's life. And but for me, there have been plenty of lessons learned along the way. You know, after I came to the Lord when I was a freshman in college, I had the opportunity to run for office by the time I was 29 years old here in Indiana. And I think I had convinced myself that when it comes to politics, there might be an exception to the golden rule. And Hoosiers with really long memories will remember I got caught up in a lot of the negative politics of the day in my first few campaigns. But in the 10 years that I was away from politics, I really had time to reflect on what my Christian faith required of me. And so by the time the next opportunity came around in the year 2000, we just purposed to run a campaign that was about who we are, what we believe, and left personal attacks aside. And I hope when people look at my career as congressman, as governor, even as vice president, that I hope, however imperfectly, that we've tried to live out that basic belief that we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves.
Right. Do you have a favorite verse, maybe a life verse that you've clung to during the years, or does that change through the seasons of life?
Oh no, for us, Jeremiah 29:11 has been above the mantle in our home since our first successful campaign for office. Karen gave it to me before the election day 2000, and it would travel to from our home here in Indiana to the governor's residence, to the vice president's residence, and now back to our home in Zionsville.
Right.
It's just simply, it's a promise our family has claimed over the years. I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope.
Right.
It's a place that we continue to try and make our refuge, even during these changing times in our life.
And you know, when that verse is read and you look at it, you know that God's plans for your life and other Christ followers is better than anything that we could dream of, right?
Yeah. Well, I can testify. Well, I had a different plan for this time in my life.
Right.
But by God's grace, I know that we did our duty during some fateful days, and I have great peace these last 5 years that we've actually been blessed to be back home in Indiana, still traveling around the country a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
I have the privilege of being able to write now.
That's right.
A number of books, teaching on college campuses, and helping to raise up those 6 going on 7
Wow.
grandchildren, all of which would have been a great deal more difficult if the plans that we had
That's right.
had worked out.
That's right. Will the plans that God has for you include a run here in 2028 for president?
We don't, let me say we never say never, but really don't feel called to public office again at this time in our life. I like that Luke Combs song that says, I think I rode that rocket about as far as it'll fly. And now I just have a great sense of calling about being a champion for faith, for the conservative values
Right.
that drew me into public service to begin with, and be there for my family. And so the opportunities that we continue to have around the country to champion all of those things we care about have been profound, and we'll continue to make that our focus, and we'll let the future take care of itself.
When you were vice president, how often did you and President Donald Trump talk about your Christian faith?
Well, the president and I spent an average of 4 or 5 hours a day together during the 4.5 years that we served and campaigned. And for me, talking about my faith is as natural as breathing in and out.
Right.
And so I would say that the president was always, very respectful of our convictions. Whenever I would bring up a biblical principle, he would listen respectfully. It's one of the things that made the end of our administration especially difficult, because as I like to say, President Trump was not just my president, he was my friend. And we had forged a very successful and close working relationship over those 4.5 years. I'll always believe that by God's grace I did my duty at the end of the administration, but I'll always be proud of the 4.5 years that we had together and what we were able to accomplish for the American people.
What kind of relationship do you have today with President Trump?
Well, it's been a while since we've talked, but I had the chance to congratulate the president personally on his reelection, and he and the First Lady received that very warmly. Pray for the president often, and like every American, I want to see our president and want to see our nation succeed.
Let's talk about the book, What Conservatives Believe. Tell me a little bit about what prompted you to write this new book.
Well, I started in politics as a Democrat down in Columbus, Indiana, back in 1975. But listening to the voice and the values of Ronald Reagan, I joined the conservative movement as a young man, and really never looked back. I heard Reagan articulate those values of a strong defense,
Right.
limited government, less taxes, less regulations, and traditional values, especially the right to life. And I joined the Reagan Revolution. And it's been those values, those conservative values, that really defined the Republican movement for the last 50 years. And during that time, largely we contested against a traditional liberal Democratic Party, liberal on social issues, for big government, for less of American leadership in the world. And now I think there's been 2 major changes that I tried to capture in the book, Scott. The first change is that I think the Democratic Party has largely been overtaken by the progressive left. We even now see, even here in the Midwest, openly socialist candidates gaining some success in Democratic primaries. And I think that represents a real sea change in the Democratic Party. But what I also wanted people to see is that there are forces afoot in the Republican Party on the populist right that embrace protectionism, isolationism, really marginalized values like the right to life. And I'll always believe that that conservative agenda is not just a winning agenda for the Republican Party, but I think it's the right agenda for America because it's grounded in the timeless ideals and principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. And at a time when I think many Americans are confused about what it means to be a conservative, I wanted to write what conservatives believe.
Yeah. Do you believe that President Trump is a conservative?
Well, I write about that in the book because the president actually made a point on many occasions when we were together to say that he was not a conservative. I think he's always been open about the fact that he defines his political philosophy as common sense.
Right.
In many instances, that lands on a conservative policy. And I want to be very clear. I think the new Trump administration has gotten a lot right. I think that extending all those tax cuts we passed during the Trump-Pence years in the One Big Beautiful Bill, standing up to Iran as no president had ever done before, standing with Israel, rebuilding our military, I think are all commendable, and they're all born of great conservative traditional principles. But when you see the president advance broad-based tariffs against friend and foe alike, the stops and starts on support for Ukraine, I think the diminishing the emphasis on values like the right to life, I think you can see that this administration has, in some respects, embraced the conservative agenda, but in other respects, they've hewn to that populist right that's impacting not only the administration, but the party. And I hope this new book plays a role in starting a conversation,
right.
Not just about what conservatives believe, but the direction of the Republican Party going forward.
The right to life has always been very important to you. How has that changed in the conservative movement?
Well, I would say to you from very early on in my faith journey, and I read those verses that said, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you.
Right.
And see, I set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. The cause of life has been really the calling of my life and my wife's life. It's what drew us into politics after a few failed campaigns again. And I'm grateful to have been a part of what was the most pro-life administration in American history. A broad range of policies that advanced the interests of the unborn and women in crisis pregnancies, but also appointed 3 of the justices that gave the American people a new beginning for life, overturning Roe v. Wade. I think what's changed, and I believe it's been impacted by these voices on the populist right, is essentially a marginalizing of the issue. I think the administration now believes that the question of abortion is exclusively a state issue, when in fact, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, they said that it was a decision for the elected representatives of the American people. Well, we elect state legislators and governors, but we also elect senators and congressmen and presidents. And I truly do believe that to ultimately restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law, we've got to see leadership at every level. On a specific issue, though, what's been most disappointing to me is that the new Trump administration has largely turned a deaf ear to concerns about the widespread availability of mail-order abortion pills in the country. You know, Indiana adopted historic pro-life legislation, and some 30 other states across the country enacted strong protections for the unborn and strong support for women in crisis pregnancies. But as we sit here today, Scott, abortion is actually on the rise across the country because the Biden administration had waived the requirement for physician consultation to receive an abortion pill. Now you can receive it through mail order. And so far, the new Trump administration has taken no steps to roll back the availability of mail order abortion in America. So as I say in the book, the first thing conservatives believe is that our rights come from God. And secondly, conservatives believe the first freedom is the right to life.
Right.
And so my hope is, as time goes on in this year and in the years ahead, we'll see the administration and Republicans return to our strong commitment to the sanctity of life.
What else, Vice President, does the Bible say about conservative values?
Well, there's a lot about living within your means. There's a lot about the nature of man. You know, I taught a course on the Constitution last year at George Mason University in Washington. And we spent a lot of time about the way the founders thought about the Constitution. And they drew from an understanding of the flawed human nature of man by creating a government that had checks and balances, that had three co-equal branches that could hold each other accountable. So I think the overall worldview of understanding human nature, that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, that's an argument for limited government and life are all principles that have informed my service from the Bible. But you know, I hope the way my faith has most significantly impacted my service is the way I've tried to deal with others. My hope is that the greatest influence of my faith in my public career has been in my and my wife's desire to treat others the way we want to be treated.
Right. You're obviously watching what's happening with the conflict in Iran. Tell me what you think in terms of how the president is handling this ongoing conflict that he thought would be settled in a few weeks, and here we are, it's been 270 days or so.
I give the president great credit for making the decision last year and then again this year to take the fight directly to the mullahs in Tehran. My brother, former Congressman Greg Pence, was a Marine stationed in Beirut in 1983 when the global war on terror began, when Iran, through Hezbollah, took the lives of some 300 Marines at the Marine Corps barracks bombing. And the Iranians have been at war with America and Israel for 47 years. And it was this president and this administration that finally took the fight directly to them. Ending the nuclear threat, ending Iran's nuclear ambitions, I believe is a vitally important goal for our security and security of the free world. I'm incredibly proud of the job our troops have done in Operation Epic Fury, but I continue to believe there's more work to be done. That I think what the Iranians have demonstrated over the last 60 days, now the memorandum of understanding has lapsed, and the ceasefire that happened before that is that I don't think they're yet serious about coming to the table to end their nuclear ambitions and program, end support of terrorism, restore freedom of navigation to the Strait of Hormuz. And so I think at the end of the day, in the near term or the longer term, we're going to have to see the armed forces of the United States of America and our ally Israel finish the job.
Okay. You feel like we're going to need to see boots on the ground in Iran in order to settle this?
I think it's important that you never say what you'll never do. I mean, we have the greatest military in the history of the world, and I would trust the leaders at CENTCOM. I'd trust Admiral Cooper to come to the president with a plan. But look, the Iranian people long for freedom. They took to the streets in January again this year, as they did in 2008 in the Green Revolution, and tens of thousands of them were cut down by the radical extremists that control that country. Giving them an opportunity to claim freedom would be not only a right in history, but also it would result in a freer and more secure Middle East for generations to come.
Some of the things that are coming out in the news today is that the president has suggested that he might consider bombing Oman because of their deal that they're trying to leverage with Iran. There's been the reports about the conditions on board the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, and the fact that these sailors have been at sea for so long, and then kind of just wondering what the off-ramp might be and how this is impacting gas prices to Americans. So what are your thoughts on some of those things that we're hearing in the news?
Well, as I wrote in my book, I think it's a conservative principle that when you go to war to win. And in the early going, our armed forces were unleashed against the Iranian military, and in 4 weeks took down 13,000 military sites out of some 25,000 that exist in that country. They just did a brilliant and masterful job. But the ceasefire that was embraced, the negotiations that have gone forward, have of course taken their toll on our military, but they have responded as American servicemen and women always do, with great courage and great resilience, and made every one of us proud. But at the end of the day, now that the USS Lincoln will be steaming home and replaced with the George Washington Carrier Group, my hope is that the president continues to reserve the ability in the region to allow our armed forces to finish the job. There's an old saying, Scott, that one does not make peace with one's enemy, one makes peace with one's defeated enemy. And for all of their posturing, for all their recalcitrance, I don't get the impression that the mullahs in Tehran feel that they're defeated yet. And we simply may need to allow the armed forces of the United States once again to do what they do and convince them otherwise.
The president also suggested, I guess, in a post that the Strait of Hormuz should be a U.S. territory. What do you think of that?
I think what's important is that the United States, literally for over 100 years, has been the vouchsafe for freedom of navigation around the world. And what we want to see restored in the Strait of Hormuz, maintained in the Taiwan Straits and in the South China Sea, is simply freedom of navigation. We have the ability to do that along with our allies, but at the end of the day, either the Iranians are going to have to forfeit their ability to use force, forfeit their subsidy of terrorist elements across the region, and ultimately forfeit and dismantle their nuclear program, or we'll have to do with military strength what's necessary to restore freedom of navigation and restore security to the region.
Let's get back to the book and the idea that you write in the book about young people may not know a Republican president other than Donald Trump. And so trying to remind that next generation coming up what conservatives believe. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, I think that and social media plays a big role in this as well. Some of the loudest voices on the progressive left, as well as the populist right, find their home in social media. And the principles that have guided the conservative movement throughout my lifetime are really timeless American ideals and principles. And as you suggest, I wrote the book in large part because I think many young people today who see protectionist policies, who see us questioning whether America needs to be the leader of the free world, whether we need to stand with our longstanding allies, especially Israel. Many young people are confused about what it means to be a conservative. And that's why throughout the book, in each chapter, I try and lay out what the core conservative principle is, and then talk about some of the fault lines on the left and the right that are happening in American politics today. Now, that being said, I still believe the overwhelming majority of people in this country believe in those timeless principles. They believe that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. They believe in limited government, in free market economics and free enterprise. They believe in the family and they believe in protecting our most vulnerable, the aged, the infirm, the disabled, and the unborn. And so for me, the challenge that Republican candidates will have, not only this year, but over the next 2 years and beyond, is simply let's give voice to those principles and allow the American people to rally around them, as they did in years past, and I believe will again.
What do you think will happen during the midterm elections? As you look into the crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen?
I think the party in power in the White House always has an uphill climb in the midterm elections. If you remember our first midterm election, we lost control of the House of Representatives, and this is going to be a tough year. That being said, I think Speaker Mike Johnson has done a remarkable job with very, very tight margins in the Congress, where I served for 12 years, passing legislation. I think extending all of those tax cuts that were passed during the Trump-Pence years was really remarkable, given the close quarters that they've been in terms of voting. But the American people, I think, are facing an enormously important choice, whether we're going to stay essentially on a path of limited government, pro-growth policies, and America standing tall in the world, supporting our military and our values, or whether we'll follow the siren song of promises on the progressive left, or even some on the populist right. My belief is that the best prescription for candidates this fall in my party is also the best prescription for America, and that is the candidates that are out there talking about timeless conservative principles, a strong defense, fiscal responsibility, values, will prevail in the House and Senate and in state houses all across the country.
As we wrap up this episode of Christian Newsmakers, I wanted to ask the Vice President one final question. I think a lot of people may just be anxious about what's happening in the world today. And as a Christian man and somebody who really relies on his faith, for somebody who's dealing with some anxiety and struggles about what they see out there in the world, what encouragement can you share with them in terms of Christian biblical principles that you think are important for somebody to hang on to?
Well, it's a wonderful question. Look, I have great confidence in the future of this country. That springs from my faith in God, who I believe has ever had his hand on this now 250-year-old experiment in freedom. The founders believed that. They claimed rights that were endowed by their Creator. And I believe that's still at the heart of the American experiment, and we'll enjoy his blessings as a result. The other source of my confidence, though, comes from the American people. You know, when you're a congressman, certainly when you're governor, when you're vice president, a lot of times you see the American people in the wake of the worst circumstances. I traveled to where tornadoes tore across southern Indiana when I was governor. I remember the flooding in southern Indiana when I was a congressman. And of course, wildfires and hurricanes when I was vice president. And I think just as you're seeing in Indiana today, the American people are the most generous, the most resilient, the most caring, and the most patriotic people the world has ever known. And I tell people, if you go to the site of a disaster, and I know it's true in central Indiana, in the flooding today, and in east central Indiana, and places like Cambridge City, I know the only thing you won't be able to find after the floodwaters recede is a parking spot, because people come from everywhere. They load up their pickup trucks and their minivans with food and bottles of water and tools, and they come and help people they've never met before and will never see again put their lives back together. And I see that in Indiana at this very hour. I see people coming alongside neighbors and friends, helping them put their lives back together. You've covered that with great integrity and professionalism here at WTHR, and I commend you. But it's those stories, it's that character of the American people and my faith in God that convinces me that the best days for the greatest nation on earth are still to come.
Vice President Mike Pence, his new book, What Conservatives Believe. Thank you again for coming to Channel 13 and talking about your faith and your new book.
Thanks, Scott.
Great
Good to be
seeing
with
you.
you.
Thank you.